Hello? Yes, this is Red Hook 1, Holly Farm at Red Hook in Dutchess County. An honored host to two women of affairs instead of just one.
Why, dear, we're very honored. And is that why you have that very snazzy bow tie on?
It is indeed. I dress for my guests, always.
You're very cute indeed. Well, I think we have such a good old friend for a guest and such a well-known guest that we aren't going to just be chatting with an old friend of ours. We're going to be chatting with an old friend of many, many people listening in today because our guest is Susan Adams, who for 15 years was known as Aunt Susan, who ran her radio cooking school over another station in Oklahoma City. We won't mention the network. And Aunt Susan, who, as Susan Adams, was food editor of McCall's Magazine for several years in New York City, and who is now living in New York and making a very fine career as editor-in-chief of the Betty Crocker Magazine of the Air, which is on another network. But I'm not going to tell which one, Woody, are you?
No, I certainly am not. We are loyal to mutual, Susan.
Susan, how do you feel about being up here today in this beautiful countryside? Do you like being out of New York City?
Oh, it's just wonderful. I think I'm going to join that bromidic throng that always says, New York's wonderful, but I wouldn't live in it if you'd give it to me.
You know, Susan, it's very pleasant for us to have you up here and to know that you and your husband are looking, in a sense, for a farm here in our area.
Well, it's mighty pleasant for us, and I think we're just about going to land right here as your neighbors, folks.
Oh, that would be swell.
Wonderful.
We could think of nothing nicer. Susan, tell me, now you didn't come to New York City a long time ago, did you?
No, 5 years ago.
You did?
Mm-hmm. Just been here 5 years.
And what was it that made you want to come to the country, really?
Well, after all, I came, from the Southwest, the great wide open spaces. Mm-hmm. And as a little girl, I was on a farm every summer back in the old Ozarks. You know, Virginia.
Why, sure.
Oh, yes, of course.
And it's in my blood, and we've been in the bricks and stones just as long as we can stand it. We just need to get out where there's grass and trees and flowers.
Well, are you thinking of it as a permanent home or just perhaps for weekends?
No, we want it for a permanent home. We may have to use it for weekends for a while, but we want to grow old together on this little old place.
Well, you got a long way to go before you grow old, Susan. Well, Susan, I was wondering if you came to Dutchess County because you were a supporter and a first-rate fan of the late President Roosevelt for so many years when you were in Oklahoma and when you were in New York.
Well, I'm just wondering. Of course, it has a great deal of charm for me because it was the president's home. But we happened to be invited out here one time for a weekend guest. Don't you remember, Jenny, last summer when I was coming out here and you said, why, that's in our back door.
Yes.
And somehow we've been back. This is the third or fourth time now, just by chance. I kind of believe it's meant for us to come back here because we love it.
It
well,
could be.
The country, don't you think, is so beautiful?
Oh, it's beautiful.
Do you think it's more beautiful than your own Oklahoma country? That's a good question.
Well, Oklahoma's young. It has a long way to go yet. See, how's that? It has awfully pretty red dirt.
That's very diplomatic of you, Susan, I must say.
Susan would be fine and at home in the Sahara Desert.
I'm talking only of the scenery.
Well, Susan, the scenery includes your very lovely, lovely spring hat, which I must comment on. It's perfectly beautiful. But tell me now, I know that when you were Aunt Susan in Oklahoma on your radio show, you had a great deal of fun and went to a great many very famous kitchens, much more famous than this little kitchen at Echo Valley Farm. Weren't you one of the few people who was ever in the Buckingham Palace kitchens in England?
Yes, I'm told that I really was, and I've always been delightfully grateful for it because the only reason that I ever got into Buckingham Palace was, and I'm being quite truthful now, was because I simply did not know enough to know that I couldn't get in.
Good.
That's wonderful. Well, how did you get in?
Well, I sort of sat on the front door steps for about 3 days, and I think they just thought it was sort of unusual for anyone to ask such a question, and I honestly believe that's why I got in, because I was so sure that I had to get in.
Well, do they have all the modern conveniences?
Would you be interested to know that in Buckingham Palace, I saw one mechanical refrigerator?
And that's
One?
all?
That's all. All the rest of them were ice boxes.
How big was it?
Just a little bitty one.
Well, was it a great big room, the kitchen?
The kitchen really is a very interesting and beautiful, homey, old-time, practical, workable, clean kitchen.
It was?
All the surfaces are wood, just scoured as white and clean as could be. And the courtyard is so pretty outside of it. Great big old copper kettles. And, it's just a beautiful old kitchen. And I always have thought somebody gave the someone there in the kitchen, that Electrolux, just to get the the refrigerator in there.
Well,
Maybe the
kit-
king and queen got on a quiz show and won it. Do you think so?
No, I don't think. Incidentally, Queen Mary and King George were there, when I was there. That was.
Oh, they were.
Well, that
yes.
was in King George's Silver Jubilee, wasn't it?
No,
Or
but
what?
after that. And did I ever tell you that the very next morning after I'd been at the palace that day, the very next night after I'd been at the palace that day, I went to Old Drury Lane Theater, and so help me, they came to the theater.
They did?
It was their first time in 3 years.
Well, of course,
really?
Susan, you're such an elegant cook that they were following you around.
Well, I always thought they thought it was kind of nice just to give me that little,
Be
kind of a
friendly.
little salute. Mm-hmm.
Well, Susie, what were they cooking? Were they cooking when you went through the kitchen?
Yes, they had. You want to know what they had for
Yeah,
lunch?
why
They were
not?
sending the king. They were sending King George lunch up to him on the dumb waiter, and I saw it. It was fish, poached fish, and coleslaw, and they'd have cabbage, don't you? And then crackers. Those hard water crackers.
Oh, yes.
And cheese and tea, and that was all.
And that was all.
A very simple lunch.
Very sensible, simple lunch.
He didn't take after his father, Edward VII, who would have had all kinds of goodies. Well, Susan, didn't you also visit the French Republic's head house and kitchen there?
I went to the President Lebrun in Paris. I went to the his courtyard kitchen, and I had a full hour down there with the French chef, and it was a perfectly delightful experience. I enjoyed the beautiful old copper pans and kettles, which had been in Napoleon's home in Versailles, for a long, long time. They had taken them over there.
Oh,
that
really?
interesting? Yeah.
Well, was the cooking and the atmosphere much different in the French kitchen
Quite
from the
different
English?
indeed it was.
Must have been, because there's such a difference in French food.
It was good, too.
Now, our slogan, See America First. Have you ever been in the White House kitchen?
Indeed, I did. When I came back from Buckingham Palace and the Queen's kitchen, and then came from the President's kitchen in Paris, certainly I wanted to see our very own kitchen. And our beloved President Roosevelt was right there then. And I went down to the White House kitchens. And they had in fact, they were just in the process right then of making them all electric.
Oh.
And Mrs. Nesbitt, who was the housekeeper then, she took me through and was most gracious and courteous to me, and I enjoyed it tremendously.
Well, did you happen to see the president's lunch going up, Susie?
No, I didn't see the president's lunch, but the guard was trying his best to get me out, and I just wanted to see one more thing, So I just kept kind of staying and just sort of loafing along. And what do you suppose happened? I think something much more exciting than the king and queen coming to the show. Honestly, I did.
What?
President Roosevelt pushed himself out into the little pergola there, and toward his swimming pool.
Oh.
And I saw him right close up.
You
Well,
did?
good enough.
Oh, what a thrill for a fan.
What kind of a kitchen isn't it, Susan?
In the White House, it's
Yes.
electric kitchen. It's
All
all the way
electric,
through.
you mean?
Well, Mrs. Roosevelt, I think, had those put in, didn't she? She's the one who
Yes.
inaugurated. Mrs. Nesbitt, that housekeeper of the president's and Mrs. Roosevelt's, is a neighbor of ours at Poughkeepsie.
Yes,
Yes.
I knew that.
she
And do you
is.
know, I did a story about her and about her kitchens, and it was a full-page story on shall I tell you where?
Sure.
Daily Oklahoman.
Why,
the Oklahoma
certainly.
Publishing Company, which visits more homes than there are people in the state.
This is more homes than people in the state is what I love.
She has old loyalties, Virginia.
Oh, well,
doesn't
she should. She's wonderful. Well, Susie, I think you're very sweet to drop in today and chat. And you know what I want to ask you? I want to know what you, a food expert and a homemaking authority, thinks about those of us who go to a lot of fuss to have visitors. How do you feel about company dinners, Susie?
Yes.
Well, Jenny, I think I can answer you very nicely because I had done at your house, and I know that you had one of your very own turkeys.
Yes.
And you had things that grew right on your very own farm. Now, I think that would be so nice if each person would just sit down and have a little conference with themselves and decide to prepare for company the very thing which grows in their backyard, so to speak. For instance, when you live out where there's lots of corn, why don't you serve corn on the cob with the very best butter in the world and just serve oodles of it? Just gorge people on corn.
Well, yes,
And
but
in-
that's only good for a week or two a year.
Well,
What do you do the rest
can
of the
dry
time?
it and can it and keep on serving it.
Yes, true, you can.
Woody's canned it, haven't you, dear?
I can. It was very disastrous results, Susan, last fall.
What happened?
It blew right up, right
Oh.
sky high.
Oh,
Well, Susan's corn doesn't blow up. People love it. Well, Susan, right here in Dutchess County where we have so many apples, what do you think that we should do to build up a dessert? Anybody who lives in apple country like Oregon or Dutchess County or Michigan or anywhere that apples are very, very much the fruit of the day and the year. What would you suggest for a good dessert that's kind of simple and delicious and that you could serve all the time?
You know, Jenny, I grew up in the old Ozarks, in the apple country, you know, and there's no better apples in the world unless it is in Dutchess County.
I was just about to take issue, Susan.
Well, I wish that people who have wonderful apples, as you have here in Dutchess, shall I say we?
Yeah,
Yes.
we
As
have.
we have here in Dutchess County, I wish they'd just decide to do, well, for lack of anything better to say, Aunt Susan's apple dumpling.
That's your own recipe because
my
What
own
is Aunt
recipe.
Susan's apple dumpling?
Well,
Yeah.
you simply make some pastry. Use orange juice and orange rind instead of water. Roll it out real thin. Cut it in long strips.
Mm-hmm.
And then roll those strips around the peeled apple.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of course, you've hollowed out the center first.
Yeah.
And then you put this apple into your baking pan, fill it all full of sugar and lots of good butter right in the center
Boy.
of it. And there's your pastry, your apple, and then take some of the peelings and make some juice and pour that peeling juice
Oh,
right over that.
boy.
You see, with some more sugar in the juice, of course.
Mhm.
Anybody can do it. You don't need a recipe. And bake them. And when they're done, that pastry is a golden, rich, crusty brown. The red of the apples oozes out over this good crust, and the apples are juicy. Of course, they take up the flavor of the butter and the sugar, you know.
Mhm.
And there isn't anything in the whole wide world any
Oh,
better.
I'm drooling,
Susan,
Susie.
may I ask you if you would marry me pretty soon?
In the second incarnation, I'm very happily married right now.
I know,
You
so am I,
certainly are.
Susan, but, you know, this kind of talk just makes me drool, too.
You know what, Susan?
You
I
don't
thought...
look underfed, Woody, may I add.
Thanks, pal. That's a good gal of you to say that. And he isn't underfed. If you can sit with him, as you will after a while, you'll see what I mean. But, you know, I'm the dopey type, dear. How long do you bake the apples? And I have an electric oven, and what temperature, what thing do you
bake
set it
them
at?
about 375 degrees, between 350, 375. And most apples will take 45 minutes.
They will.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, that sounds simply elegant. If we don't have dumplings the next week, I think there'll be trouble.
What would
around
you
here.
do for a man like me, Susan, whose appetite sometimes gets a little jaded?
Well, I'd have fried apples and sausage for supper and hot biscuit.
Oh,
For supper?
boy.
Never thought of it for supper. Isn't
Well,
that
it's
exciting?
perfect
Oh,
for
it's-
supper.
it's
And I'd
wonderful.
have lots of apple sauce
Mm-hmm.
all the time, great big bowls of it.
Mhm.
Because, well, how do you make your applesauce, Susie?
Do you want me
peel?
to tell you,
Yeah, I
Millie?
want you to know. I want you to
Well,
tell
I
me.
peel only half of the apple, so that you have some of that peel left on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I cut them not in quarters, but in eighths.
Mm-hmm.
And then pour just the least little bit of water over these eighths. Not enough, just enough to keep them from burning, you know, because you don't want them to be soupy.
Yeah.
And then put them on, let them cook quickly. Add the sugar about 5 minutes before you're going to take them up. And, oh, yes, I forgot to tell you, put just a little inch or two of lemon rind in them.
Uh-huh.
And when they cook down, they are a kind of a clear, translucent gold color.
Oh, boy.
And that juice around them is just pure, rich, juicy, syrupy apple juice.
Oh, Susan, I'm
Put
just...
that into a bowl, serve it with hot biscuit, and you don't need any dessert ever.
Oh, that sounds simply wonderful. Well,
Oh,
Susan...
dear.
Well,
Oh.
Woody's finished for the day. You can just lie down now and dream of this under the
You
cork
could at
tree.
least stay for the weekend, can't you?
Oh, yes. I
Stay
think
through
I'll
the
stay.
week, Susan. It's
All
Thursday,
right.
and so you might as well stay
All
through the
right.
week,
I'm
dear.
Shall I
sure
make
Virgin-
apple dumplings for you tonight?
Oh,
yes,
brother.
ma'am. Virginia's got an apron that'll fit you, and I personally will turn on the stove for you.
I've got an apron that would lose Susie. She's so petite and small-limbed and small-waisted.
I do hope you'll come back again soon, Susan.
Will you,
Adams.
Susie?
I'd love to.
And
It's
not
been
just
lots
to
of
chat
fun.
either.
No, come back and cook, honey.
I'd be glad to, really.
Thank you very much for dropping in with us today, Susan Adams. And
It's
goodbye,
been a
everybody.
Great deal of fun, and we've got some very solid information. Thanks a lot, Susan.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody. This is Woody Klose.
And Virginia.
We've been transcribing directly from our home, Echo Valley Farm in Red Hook, New York. Goodbye.
Goodbye.